Okay, in this session, I want to look at products and documents. This is quite an interesting area within projects because there's a lot of ideas that either people go to the extreme of doing too much documentation, or we go to the other extreme and not do enough. So I'm going to go through some aspects about documents, products, if you like, and why they're needed in projects and the type of documents we have, and really what the sort of information we're trying to trap here. And that's probably the key thing to understand, is looking at the information we need to record, and therefore some of the ideas on how we might do that. Right. At the end of the day, a lot depends on the criticality of the project, how much information that the business wants you to record, audit purposes, all these sort of things. But remember, it is a very strong form of communication. And at the end of the day, we have to work out what type of communication is important for me and for my project that's going to work the best for the way we need to do that. And a lot of the times you need to talk to the business and find out how they want to do it, how people are going to work, the type of approach you're taking to develop the solution and manage the project. All these needs need to be considered. But what's very important, there is some information that we need to record. Remember, at the end of the day, this is a project and it's a business project. Therefore, some documents have to be in place in some respects. How you use them, to what degree, obviously it just depends on how you think you need to make it work. And that's the key element here. Don't do something because you have to, because it says I've got to do that document. Do it because you need it, because it has a purpose for the project. This is probably the best advice to take. Okay. Now, I'll put up here products and documents, because if we're producing some information, then that is a product. We're producing a document, that is a product, if you like, of the project. And I'm saying that carefully to make sure we don't get a little bit too confused looking at requirements, because some people talk products, they're also requirements. But technically, yes, at the beginning of a project, what we understand about what we need to deliver are a series of products. It becomes a requirement. The product turns into a requirement once we prioritize and understand its need. Why is it required for that project, and what is its specific need? Must I deliver it? Is it something that I can have a workaround for the moment? Is it something that actually is the icing on the cake? It isn't crucial to the solution at all. It needs to add value, like we said, but it isn't a crucial solution, and therefore it can be left off. In other words, becomes contingency. Right? So these are requirements as far as we're concerned. Right? But products turn into requirements because we prioritize them. But we're going to talk about products, documents for this time period. Okay. Now, we're running a business project. Therefore, one of the key elements, one of the key documents we need to have is a business case. This is absolutely vital, because this is the document that's going to record all the aspects around why the business are running the project. In other words, these two big questions: the why, reasons, and the what, the benefit we expect, or the business expect to realize from this project. At the end of it, the beneficial change they're looking for. So the business case records that, records the investment, timescales, budgets. We'll look at that in a separate session anyway. But this is the important information, and this is going to be one of their key reference documents as the project progresses, to look at it and say, are we still tracking on from the beneficial point of view? Are the reasons behind the project still valid? Right? Do we still want it? Is it still desirable from a strategic point of view as well as from a project point of view? Right? Is it still viable? Can it still be built? Are we having problems building it? Right? And therefore, are we going to achieve what we want by building it? And that's the third element. So the business case is a vital document that the business need to have throughout as a reference point as to those areas. Right? So it's an organic document. It will evolve as the project evolves. It will change, sometimes to a small degree, sometimes to a big degree. Right? We'll look at how we change those and record that separately a bit later on in this session. Okay, so we have different elements and different variations of it, but it needs to be current. Remember, the business needs to make an informed decision, and the business case is going to be one of those areas. Right. The next one it's useful to understand is to record the scope of the project. This is all the elements, there's all elements, products, requirements, if you like, all the parts of the scope that need to be delivered. This is what the overall scope of the project is about. Now, some call that The product-based planning, linked to that, which we do a session on that. I do a session on scope to explain the overall view of scope. Now, how you record that requirements list, whatever it happens to be, it doesn't matter. The format you record it in, organizational type structure, whether it's a star mapping or just a spreadsheet, doesn't really matter. The complexity will help you understand that. And also how people see things visually. What is important to understand, what is the scope of the project? Because there are two key elements in there. The first one, internal, and the other part are the external products, dependencies, right? These are two areas we need to know, because this is about control. So we need to understand what they are. So somewhere you need to record that information. And that's going to expand as you go through. Some call them burn down charts from a project perspective, by the way, not from a Scrum perspective. From an overall project, burn down charts, whatever you want to call it. So it's important to record the scope in there. Right. Now, at some point, we also want to know how we're going to manage the project. So we've got project approach here. How I'm going to manage the project. So management of project. And that really means the type of steps we're going to have in place, the type of methods we're going to have a look, some of the documentation, the communication we're going to have in place. And the communication is usually between the PM, project or program manager, or even portfolio for that manager, but in projects, that the project manager, and the relevant roles within the project level part of the project. Usually the person who's paying for the project represents the business and paying for it, the owner of the project, and the representation from the group, users, sponsors, users and visionaries and so on, who are the recipients of the beneficial change that's going to take place within the project. So that's something that needs to be recorded. How we're going to run the project itself, right? Now, that means taking different techniques in place we can have, etc., as we go through the project too. Okay. The other part is also now to look at how we're going to build. What sort of vision do we need at the end? So we need to look at the solution, the vision, right? That is what is to be at the end of the project. So we need to document, how's that solution going to look at the end of the document, at the end of the project? What are we expecting to come? Because that's linked to the benefits and to the vision of the reasons why at the beginning. So we need to look at what's the overall final solution? What's my website going to look like? What's this new document, the new building? What's the relocated office going to look like at any point in time? The new data center, whatever project ready, the new product we're putting in place, the new cornflakes packet, for example. So what is it going to look like at the end? And linked to that is how we're going to develop the solution. Develop the solution, right? That is also very important. How we're going to build it. So that links back to this. And he'll have a lot more detail about how that's going to happen from a point of view of, the approaches we need to take, iterative development, fix, work packages and stuff like that. How we're going to run it from a timescales point of view. The other part is how we're going to the quality we need to have in place. All these things, testing, all these things about how I'm going to build the solution. We need to record that in some format or another. And how you do that just depends really on the complexity and what you have to have in place. And of course, finally, linked to all that, we need to have a plan, a delivery plan. How I'm going to deliver the project, run the project, if you like, yeah. Now, project plans, delivery plans, at the end of the day, it is a plan, okay? Now, the plan itself is called a snapshot of an understanding at a point in time, right? Like the rest of these are, they all represent a point in time for that piece of information. If it changes, then obviously all these documents have to be updated. We'll look at some others in a minute, but these are some of the key areas we need to have. Right. So they have to be updated. Make sure though that if there are changes in place, these are authorized changes to any of these documents relevant to what we see at the project at any point in time. But the plan is a snapshot. The key thing about planning, of course, is getting people in there and working together and do the planning. That is far more beneficial than the plan. The plan just represents what you've agreed at that point in time and how we see things forward. Remember, the whole word about project is we're projecting ourselves into the future to see how we think it's going to run from here onwards and how we need to manage it and what we expect to do in certain points in time, because we need to make decisions, for instance, right? So when we split a project up as a delivery plan and we put in time frames like this, these sections here are about decisions, really. It's about decision making. It's not about releasing stuff so we can make a decision on what we've released to see how that's building for the project. But it's about decision points, right? So the plan itself is representing quite a lot of information. What we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and how we're going to do it, etc. And we look at that in a different section anyway. So just going through some of the key elements. So we need a business case. We need a plan. These are probably the two most critical documents in place because the scope can be incorporated into the plan, right? Okay, now the solution development quite often can be incorporated into the plan. The approach will be reflected in that. But these areas are to help you understand, depending on how much information I've got and how I need to represent it, that's where it will be at any point in time. Right, to make sure people understand that. Now, what you call it and how it's presented is entirely how you feel your organization needs it, your particular business area needs it, and how you like to work with the rest of your team. Remember, it has to be something that can be collaborative and people can understand what's in the document. Now, other information we need to trap are going to be things like risks and issues. Where do we record those? Right? Quite often logs, registers, they can be incorporated into the plan. There's a plan issue or a plan risk. Remember the difference between a risk is something we can manage because we can see it up front because it may happen. An issue is something we have to respond to right now because it's happening now and we have no plan in place. Again, we talk about these in other sessions. So we can trap that into logs or registers, right? Registers, or incorporate it into the plan, if you like, as a separate part of the plan. You know, if it's part of a program, you'll probably need a separate register that is linked to all the rest of the program and other projects within it. Right? We need to record like configuration. Configuration details of the build of the project, right? Versions, right, of the solution. Now we talk about the solution here primarily, but at the end of the day, there's also versions of documents we've got trapping as well. We need to record those, right? And as I said, we'll talk about those in a moment. Looking at, baselining, for example. Okay. Now, there are all sorts of things like retrospectives we can have at the end of time frames, retrospectives, time frames, like time boxes. We have those at the end of time boxes, at the end of time frames here, time frames like stages, for instance, increments, whatever you want to call them, quite frankly, and increments. How those are going. Because remember, these are sort of helping us with lessons learnt, how people have performed, how the solution has been performing and building, how the time boxes have gone, how our estimations have worked, all these things, how everybody's worked interactively, and what have we been able to deliver at this point in time to transition into operations, if that's what you're going to do, or how pilots have gone. So all this stuff will go into there, record also how each of those specific elements have happened. And of course, the plan is not just the delivery plan. By the way, we also have time frame plans, which could be time box plans in here, for instance, time box plans, if you like. Right, work package plans. Whatever mechanism you're using, you need to put some sort of plan in place. Responsibility of the project manager is here. The guys doing the work is in here. Okay. Reports come out. Try and keep reporting down to a minimum. Quite often, most of the time we do reports and it's like, please explain sort of thing happening, or come and have a chat with me about it. Sometimes we need to do reports from an auditing purpose, but try and keep most of the information that's relevant to the area of work you're doing and to some of the information that you need to have in case you need to have audits. People like to have documents and stuff, but remember, keep it relevant. Okay, keep it fairly relevant to what you have. Now, just to expand on a point here, baselining. Let's have a quick talk about baselining. While we're designing any of these documents and building them and filling them up through iterative processes through the first couple of phases of the project, before we start the project, we're still trying to get a good understanding how we're going to run it. Now, once we've got to an agreed state that we're ready to get going, or we pull the plug on the thing anyway, but hopefully we're going to go ahead and run the project, what we need to do is agreed those states. So we're locking down and signing them off now as a decision that we decide this is the information and we're therefore baselining. What this means is here is the first cut of all this information, freeze framing everything from here onwards, and this is where we're going to work against from here. So now the baselining on the base business case gives us an understanding where we are as we see it at that point. Right. What it helps us to do, that if we get minor changes, like going from version 1 to version 1.1, make sure we get the right authorities sign off, right? But it's still a small change against the relevant and the current view of things. If we get to the point where there's a big change of scope that either changes the plan, changes our scope, or we have a change of approach within it, then what we need to do now is re-baseline those relevant documents, because that gives us a bigger reference point between the original version or the previous version and compared to where we are now and moving forward. As an example, for instance, we all have an operating system on our laptops. So if we start off operating system at version 1, and then we get minor changes through little critical updates or minor changes through other types of updates, here goes version 1, version 1.1, 1.2, you know, like service pack releases or minor changes within it. Still the same major baseline, version 1, but we'd add little incremental changes to it, right? Then as we go through and then release a new version of that operating system, we now go to version 2, this is effectively re-baselining it. Now we've got the new baseline, we can see the bigger differences between version 1 and version 2 rather than having to go through all the smaller ones. But again, it's all about making sure that we're working off the most current piece of information for the decisions to be made. Now, this is usually the major critical information that we need to record through projects. Right? The first 6 here are the prime ones. Obviously, this information is extra, which can be incorporated into other parts of the documents or separate versions, and depends on the software you're using to drive the program with as well, drive the project with. Right? But just remember, the title is not so important. It's making sure that I'm recording the information I need to, and whatever title I'm using, people understand that what that represents is that specific information, right, for that particular part of the project. Right? So let's not get too clever with stuff, but make sure that what you do is relevant, but it has the right information in it. So that helps give you a good start to some documentation.